Eleanor Hayes was 10 years old the day she found the man in the trunk. She lived with her grandmother in a faded trailer at the edge of the Riverside salvage yard, where her grandmother kept the books for Mr. Donovan, the owner. The yard was Eleanor's kingdom, a maze of twisted metal, rusting frames, and hollowed-out cars where she invented worlds out of other people's discarded lives. She was small for her age, with light brown hair that refused to stay tame no matter how Ruth tried to comb or braid it. Her clothes were clean but clearly secondhand, mostly from the church donation box. The first thing most people noticed, though, was her face, a port wine birthmark covering the left side from temple to jaw. She'd grown used to the looks, but the way strangers stared still hurt. On a bright afternoon, Eleanor was exploring a newly arrived car, a black sedan that, unlike most of the wrecks around it, still looked almost whole. She circled it, frowning slightly. It was a high-end model, the sort of car that didn't usually end up in Donovan's yard. That was when she heard it, a dull, muffled thump from the trunk. She froze. Her heartbeat rushed in her ears. The sound came again, harder this time. Eleanor scanned the yard. The office trailer sat quiet under the sun. Her grandmother was inside, working. Mr. Donovan had gone into town. No one else was around. She edged closer to the trunk. "Hello," she called, voice thin in the open air. The thumping turned frantic. A hoarse, trapped voice mumbled from inside, too muffled to make out. Hands shaking, Eleanor tried the trunk latch. It didn't budge. Locked. She spun in place, searching, until her gaze snagged on a crowbar leaning against a stack of scrap. It was almost as long as she was tall. It took all her strength to drag it back to the car. "I'm going to try to open it," she shouted to the unseen person inside. "Hold on." The metal was heavy and awkward in her small hands. It took several clumsy attempts to wedge it into the seam. On the fourth try, the lock gave with a harsh metallic crack, and the trunk lid sprang up. Inside lay a man. He was bound hand and foot with rope, his mouth sealed with a strip of duct tape. He looked to be in his early 40s, with dark, wavy hair matted to his bruised, bloodied face. His gray-green suit was torn, streaked with dirt and grease. His eyes flew to Eleanor's face, going wide, and he made urgent, muffled sounds against the tape. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she leaned in and carefully peeled the tape from his mouth. He sucked in a sharp breath and coughed. "Thank God," he rasped. "Thank God. Please untie me. Quickly." She attacked the knots at his wrists. They were tight and complicated, but she was used to working with small, stubborn things. Patiently, she picked at them until one loosened, then another. As soon as his hands came free, he helped her with the bindings around his ankles. He clambered out of the trunk, unsteady, wincing as he straightened. Leaning against the car for support, he looked around the salvage yard as if trying to understand where he was. Then his gaze dropped back to Eleanor. He stared at her. For a long moment, his eyes didn't leave her face. His expression shifted through shock, disbelief, something close to awe. Eleanor's hand twitched upward, almost of its own accord, to touch the familiar heat of her birthmark, a reflex she developed whenever people looked too long. She lowered her eyes to her worn sneakers. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked quietly. "Should I get my grandma or call the police?" He kept staring. Then, to her surprise, his eyes filled with tears. He sank down to his knees in the gravel so they were nearly eye level. One hand lifted toward her cheek, shaking, and stopped just short of touching her skin. "What's your name?" he asked, voice thick. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Hayes. What's yours?" "William," he said. "William Hartley." His gaze returned to the left side of her face, to the birthmark. "How old are you, Eleanor?" 10. "I'll be 11 in February." She shifted her weight, uneasy. "Are you sure you're okay? You're crying." He scrubbed at his eyes with the back of his hand. "Eleanor," he said hoarsely, "I need to ask you something important. Do you live here with your parents?" "With my grandma," she answered. "My parents died when I was little."
Car accident.
"I don't really remember them." Her brows drew together. "You're hurt. I should get Grandma Ruth. She can help." "Wait." His hand closed gently around her arm. "Before you go, your grandmother. What's her full name?" "Ruth Hayes," Eleanor said slowly. "Why?" William's eyes closed and more tears slipped out. And your mother's name? Do you know it? Eleanor thought the question was strange, but something in his face made her answer. Caroline. Caroline Hayes. She kept her maiden name. Grandma said she and my dad weren't married very long before the accident. William let out a broken sound, half laugh, half sob. He fumbled in his jacket, pulled out a worn, expensive leather wallet, and slid a photo from a plastic sleeve. Do you recognize this woman? He asked, holding it out. Eleanor took the photograph carefully. It showed a young woman in her early 20s, with light brown hair and a radiant smile. Covering the left side of her face, from temple to jaw, was a port wine birthmark. The same shape, the same place. Eleanor's breath hitched. She looks like me. Who is she? Her name was Caroline, William said softly. Caroline Hartley. She was my daughter. His voice fractured on the last word. She ran away from home when she was 19, he continued, staring at the photo. We had a terrible fight about everything. I said cruel things. Told her she was foolish, that she'd never make it on her own. I tried to force her into the life I wanted instead of letting her live the one she wanted. He swallowed hard. She left. And I was too proud, too stubborn to go after her. I told myself she'd come back. That there was time. He traced the edge of the picture with a thumb. I hired investigators to find her. Took 2 years. When they finally located her, it was here, this area. But she was already gone.
À car accident.
They said she was 21. He looked up at Eleanor, eyes raw. They told me she'd had a baby, but there was no record of what happened to the child. The investigators couldn't find a trail. I've been searching for 10 years, Eleanor. 10 years trying to find my granddaughter. Eleanor felt the world tilt under her feet. You think I'm? She licked her dry lips. My dad. What was his name? Do you know? James, William said quietly. James Novak. My investigators found a marriage certificate. Caroline Hayes married James Novak 6 months before the accident. He drew a breath. They discovered something else. Your grandmother Ruth, she was born Ruth Novak. James was her son. After the crash, after she lost both her son and daughter-in-law, she took you and moved. She changed her name back to Hayes. The investigators were searching for a Ruth Novak with a granddaughter. Not Ruth Hayes. They lost you because they didn't know she'd gone back to her maiden name. Eleanor shook her head slowly, trying to make the pieces fit. You're saying you're my grandfather? My other grandfather. I believe so, William said. Your birthmark is hereditary. It runs in my family. My daughter had it. My grandmother had it. The chances of 2 unrelated people having the same mark in the same place are very, very small. Eleanor's fingers rose again to trace the familiar outline. But this time the gesture felt different. Less ashamed, more startled. My mom had this too, she whispered. Yes, William said, and his voice went fierce. And she was beautiful. Just like you. She hated it when she was young. People stared. Kids were cruel. But as she got older, she started to see it as something that made her unique. She was magnificent, Eleanor. Strong, brave, kind. His mouth twisted. And I was a fool who drove her away. Eleanor's legs felt weak. She sank to the ground. William lowered himself beside her, still moving stiffly. What happened to you? She asked after a moment. Why were you tied up in that trunk? Business rivals, William said, his tone hardening. I'm the CEO of Hartley Pharmaceuticals. Some competitors wanted me to sell the company. When I refused, they took me. 3 days ago. I don't know exactly what they planned, but I think bringing the car here was supposed to be the end. Eleanor's eyes widened. They were going to kill you. Probably, he said. If you hadn't found me. He shook his head slowly. You saved my life, Eleanor. For a while they sat in silence, the salvage yard stretching around them in rusted heaps. Then Eleanor spoke. Are you sure I'm your granddaughter? She asked quietly. We can do a DNA test to be certain, William said. And we will. But I'm as sure as I can be right now. Your age matches. Your mother's name. Your grandmother. The birthmark. The timing. It all lines up. And if the test says yes, she asked. What happens then? He turned to her fully. Then I hope you'll let me be part of your life. I know I have no right to ask. I failed your mother. I let pride and control mean more to me than she did. And I live with that every day. If I'd been a better father, she might still be alive. He took a breath. But I can be better for you. I promise you, Eleanor, I will never make those mistakes again. What about Grandma Ruth? She asked. She's the one who raised me. We'll figure it out together, William said. She's been there for you when I didn't even know you existed. I owe her respect and gratitude. I'm not here to take you away from her. I'm asking for a chance to know you. To be your grandfather if you'll have me. Eleanor studied his bruised face, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he watched her like she was the most fragile and precious thing in the world. Something in her, some quiet instinct, believed him. We should get you help, she said, pushing herself to her feet. You need a doctor. And we have to call the police. You're right, William agreed, standing with a soft groan. He hesitated. One more thing before we go. Do you have any pictures of your mother? Of Caroline. Eleanor's shoulders fell. Grandma says they were all lost in the accident. We have one, but it's not very clear. She keeps it in her bedroom. William's face tightened with regret, but he nodded. I have many, he said quietly. Albums full. If you'll let me, I'd like to show them to you someday. I want to tell you about her. All the things I should have told her when I had the chance. They walked side by side toward the office trailer, Eleanor slowing her steps to match his limping gait. When they opened the door, Ruth looked up from a stack of invoices. Her eyes went immediately to the blood on William's face and shirt. Eleanor, get away from him, she snapped, rising fast and reaching for the phone. It's okay, Grandma, Eleanor said quickly. He's not dangerous. He was tied up in a trunk. I found him. Ruth's hand hovered over the phone. What? And Grandma? Eleanor glanced at William. He gave her a small nod. He says he's my other grandfather. Mom's father. Ruth went completely still. Her hand dropped from the phone. She looked at William as if really seeing him for the first time. William Hartley, she whispered. You know who I am, he said quietly. Ruth's voice shook. Caroline talked about you. Before the accident. She was thinking about reaching out. She said maybe enough time had passed. That maybe you could meet your grandchild. Tears welled in Ruth's eyes. Then the crash happened. And I couldn't face telling you I'd lost my son. Caroline was like a daughter to me. And Eleanor was all I had left. I was afraid if I contacted you, I'd lose her too. William's own eyes shone. I would never take her from you, he said. Never. You were there when I wasn't. When I failed her mother. I can't repay what you've done for her. I don't want to replace you. I just want to stand beside you if you'll let me. The hours that followed blurred into sirens and statements. Ruth called the police. Paramedics tended to William and took him to the hospital. Detectives interviewed everyone. A DNA test was ordered, though by then no one really doubted what it would show. In the days that followed, William's kidnappers were arrested. Desperate corporate rivals who had crossed a line they could never uncross. Hartley Pharmaceuticals weathered the scandal. But the more important story grew in quieter ways. It unfolded over weeks and months. A grandfather who had lost his daughter now found his granddaughter. A woman who had raised a child alone learned how to share that burden. A girl who'd grown up with one grandmother now gained a grandfather who looked at her birthmark not with pity, but with love and recognition. William didn't sweep in and try to change Eleanor's life overnight. He visited often, always working around Ruth's schedule. He set up a trust for Eleanor's education and secured Ruth's financial future, but he was careful not to flood their world with money. More than anything, he showed up for school plays, for parent-teacher nights, for Tuesday dinners in the cramped trailer. He kept his promise about the photos. One Sunday afternoon, he arrived carrying 3 thick albums. He and Eleanor sat at the tiny kitchen table while Ruth busied herself nearby, listening. That's your mom when she was just a few months old, William said, pointing to a picture of a chubby baby with a faint blush on her left cheek. We didn't even realize what the birthmark would look like yet. They turned page after page. Caroline as a little girl with scraped knees, As a teenager with paint on her hands, laughing with friends, scowling at the camera, caught mid-spin on a dance floor. In every stage there was the familiar sweep of color on her face. She loved art, William said, gesturing to a photo of Caroline at an easel, brush in hand. She wanted to be a painter. I told her it wasn't practical. I pushed her to study business or law. That was one of the things we fought about. I like to draw, Eleanor said softly. William looked at her with such intensity that she almost flinched. Then his expression gentled. Then you should draw, he said. As much as you want. I'll get you sketchbooks, paints, lessons, whatever you need. Because I learned too late with your mother that following your passion isn't foolish. It's what makes life worth living. As the years passed, William became a steady presence. He and Ruth built a careful, then comfortable relationship, bound by love for the same girl. Holidays were shared. Stories about Caroline flowed more freely. New traditions slowly formed. In high school, when the whispers and stares about Eleanor's birthmark grew sharper, it was William who sat with her on the trailer steps one evening and told her what he'd never managed to tell Caroline. Your mother struggled with this too, he said, nodding toward her face. And I failed her by not understanding. I thought telling her to ignore it was enough. It wasn't. He took a breath. The people who judge you for how you look aren't worth your time. This birthmark isn't a flaw, Eleanor. It's part of who you are. It connects you to your mother, to your great-grandmother, to a family line of strong, remarkable women. Anyone who can't see past it to the person you are doesn't deserve you. Later that year, Eleanor started an after-school art program for students with visible differences. Scars, burns, birthmarks. Anything that drew unkind attention. She wanted to give them a place to create and to see themselves differently. William funded supplies and space without question. The vision, though, was entirely hers. She was becoming the kind of woman her mother might have been if she'd lived. On Eleanor's 18th birthday, William arrived with a flat-wrapped package. Inside was a large portfolio. I found this last month, he said, almost shyly. I'd put your mother's things in storage after she left. I was too angry to look at them, so I shoved them all away and kept paying the bill without thinking. When I saw the charge again, I finally went to see what was there. Eleanor opened the portfolio. Dozens of paintings spilled across her lap. Landscapes full of wild color. Intimate portraits of friends and strangers. Abstract pieces that seemed to pulse with feeling. And in several, self-portraits of Caroline herself. The birthmark on her face was rendered boldly, deliberately, transformed into something luminous and striking. She learned to love herself, Eleanor whispered, tears blurring the images. She learned to see herself as beautiful. Yes, William said. And I wish I'd been there to tell her that. I can't change the past. But I can tell you this now. You are beautiful, Eleanor. Inside and out. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming. Years later, when Eleanor graduated from art school with honors, Ruth and William sat side by side in the audience. William's hair was completely white by then, his face lined, but his eyes tracked his granddaughter with undimmed pride. When Eleanor crossed the stage and took her diploma, she scanned the crowd until she saw them, Grandma Ruth dabbing her eyes with a tissue and William, applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. She had been chosen as valedictorian. When she stepped up to the podium, she took a breath and began to speak. She talked about finding beauty in unexpected places, about growing up in a salvage yard and learning that ruined things could still have value, about a birthmark that once made her feel like she didn't belong, and how it had become a source of connection and strength. And I learned, she said, glancing toward William, that sometimes the worst day of someone's life leads to something miraculous. A man was kidnapped, tied up, and left in a trunk to die. It was one of his darkest moments. But that moment led to one of my brightest. A family reunited. She held his gaze. My grandfather taught me it's never too late to change, to grow, to love. He lost his daughter because he couldn't see past his own idea of who she should be. When he found me, he chose to do better. To be better. When he looked at my face, he didn't see a flaw. He saw his child in me. He saw connection. She smiled, unself-conscious, the birthmark catching the light. He showed me that our differences aren't weaknesses, she said. They're the things that make us unique, valuable, beautiful. After the ceremony, amid hugs and photos and congratulations, Eleanor tugged William a little distance away from the crowd. "Thank you," she said simply. He frowned in mild confusion. "For what?" "For seeing me," she said. "For loving me. For being there. For showing me that family isn't just DNA. It's choosing someone, every day, and showing up for them." William pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For giving me a second chance. For letting me be your grandfather. You've given me a reason to be better than I was." Eleanor looked over his shoulder at Ruth, who was chatting with one of Eleanor's professors, pride shining on her face. She looked back at William, felt his arms around her, and understood something deep in her bones. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones. Sometimes rescue comes from the unlikeliest places. And sometimes the face we're most afraid to show the world is the very thing that brings us home. She thought of the day in the salvage yard. A scared 10-year-old girl with a birthmark and a man bound and gagged in the trunk of a car. Two people who had both been lost in their own ways, finding each other at exactly the right time. From that desperate moment had grown something unexpected and breathtaking. A family. A love built on second chances and the courage to see one another clearly. And the quiet, steady understanding that we are never truly lost, as long as someone is willing to see us for who we really are.